Let me now turn to Damilola, who's basically, like I said, someone who's put this all together, and she has the passion to take this whole process and agenda forward. So we look forward to hearing from you on certainly the India-Africa collaboration in this space. Damilola, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to thank everybody who made this possible. I get to make the speeches, but there's a whole team behind me. And I'm going to apologize to them because I'm probably not going to follow the script that they perfectly designed for me. And this is just because I'm so passionate about this topic. I'm so happy to have representation there from Her Excellency Minister of Ghana. Then we have Rwanda. We have Kenya. And we have my own home country, Nigeria, one of the largest economies, if not the largest economy in Africa. And then we're now dealing with the largest economy in South Asia as well. And I truly believe if we both can't make things work, and these continents can't speak, and we have true South-South collaboration, then we would have lost a big moment, because everybody else around the world are collaborating to make sure their economies are better, to sort out their energy needs. We are still suffering a lot of energy poverty. We have almost 1 billion people in energy poverty. So even if you have a gen set, you are really in energy poverty. But that also leads to a big opportunity with 600 million people not having access to electricity at all. We know that access can be clean. We know that access has to be clean. And we know the answer really lies on renewables. However, there are also some structural issues that are very important. We can't just say that we don't remember our grid system. There's our utility system, there's our transmission lines, there's distribution, there's last mile. So there's a lot of things that have to be done to give a robust African energy infrastructure to be able to serve our people. But what is most important is that unlike other places, Africa has decided to come together in Nairobi from the 4th to the 6th for the African Climate Summit and say to the rest of the world that although we are the victims of climate change and we do not pollute as much as everywhere around the world, and we're probably, some people even say, what is the energy we're transitioning out of, that you see Africa as a solution provider. The critical minerals, the green growth, the budding population that is there to work, that wants to work, and the government of Kenya is bringing everyone together to have a completely new narrative of the way people see Africa. I'm very proud to say that in my country, we passed an energy transition plan where the president said net zero by 2060 that we're implementing now. And this is the largest oil and gas country in Africa, so you can see how important that step is. The Kenyan government will be launching their green growth plan, EV manufacturing, two-wheelers, green hydrogen. That is the future that Kenya really sees itself as playing. The Ghanaian president will also be launching their plan, looking at how do you do lithium production in country instead of just being an extractive economy. Rwanda has been leading the charge in just conserving carbon capture in all these different things. So there's such a host and richness that different countries have been doing, and we're coming together at one continent. And we really, really need our Indian partners for this. You have done it. We have similar environments. We are used to Indians in our continent. Most of our friends have, there's always an Indian friend in my country. There's an Indian school, and I think maybe even an Indian university. So the most important thing is our development journeys are very similar, and it's mutual beneficially. It's not a charity case or an aid case. Is the way that we both can develop, our economies to both be prosperous. I really, really believe, and I say it all the time, even though I'm in the United Nations, that the answer lies in the developing world. We are the ones that are going to solve the problems that the rest of the world created, and we can only do that with true partnerships. So I just want to just set that scene. I know there's a lot of Indian private sector, and there's a lot of very forward-thinking government who's ready to listen to you, to change policies if they have to change policies, and really, really drive the green and clean energy transition. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the context setting and opening remarks. Let me now invite Sumant Sinha to speak to us. Sumant runs one of the most nifty green companies in India. the largest, and certainly a company that took a bet on this sector before it was fashionable to do so. Sumant, it will be a pleasure to hear from you on both the three A's that, or rather the three imperatives that the minister outlined in the morning: affordability, accessibility, and sustainability, but also on the collaborative context amongst the global south, but certainly India, Africa as a point of departure. So over to you, Sumant.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this session. And Damilola, thank you for your leadership of the SEforALL, which is really, I think, talking about and trying to really highlight the whole issue of accessibility particularly, and especially in the African continent, which is something that I've heard you speak so passionately about in so many forums now, which is really, I think, elevating this whole issue much more substantially. For the rest of us, actually, in the clean energy world, where we talk about large-scale issues and how to solve the large-scale problems, but all too often we don't think about the whole issue of accessibility as much as we used to think about it earlier, actually. But to come back to your point, Samir, about what the minister said about affordability, accessibility, and maybe reliability instead of sustainability, although sustainability, I guess, in some ways has a more inclusive tone to it. But just to talk about each of those three areas and look at where, in terms of the clean energy transition, we are on each of those dimensions. And of course, different countries are situated differently along each of these different dimensions. And I'll talk about where India is and what are the learnings from an India experience that can be taken into Africa. And I'll talk a little bit more about the larger scale aspects of it, then in some ways the retail aspects of it. So as far as, I think as far as the whole issue of affordability is concerned, I think it's very clear now that on a pure cost to generation basis, renewables is far cheaper than the alternative fossil fuel based power. And that is something that has been established now a few years ago. And while a number of people at some level used to doubt that earlier, I think now it's very clear that clean energy, in fact, is, if just on a pure generation basis terms, almost 40 to 50% cheaper than fossil fuels in most geographies now. Depending on the natural resource, it could be wind that is cheaper, or it could be solar that is cheaper. For example, in India, solar is cheaper than wind, but wind is also almost 40, 50% cheaper than coal-based power. Now, this is something that I think some of the countries that are still at the early stages of their energy transition have still not fully internalized. And therefore, there is still this feeling among some countries, which, by the way, India also had many years ago, that look, by not allowing us access to coal or fossil fuel-based development path, we are somehow losing out. And I think that feeling now has to totally go away. Because actually, growing via clean energy is now the smarter thing to do. It's the more affordable thing to do. And I think that is the first thing that we all need to internalize. And I remember even at the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, I heard a lot of this kind of sentiment that, oh, we've allowed, you guys all grew through coal or gas, and now it's our turn, and you're not letting us grow by using fossil fuels. And therefore, we are being disenfranchised in some way. I think that feeling really is now gone. It should be ancient history. Everybody should say, okay, for me, the most affordable way to grow is actually to use clean energy. I think that is point number one. I think the second thing, of course, is the issue of reliability, because we all know that renewable energy, in fact, is intermittent in nature. And therefore, how do you make sure that it is reliable power and that it is there at all points of day and night, and that it can be dispatchable almost in a way? And there, of course, I must say that a lot of progress has also been made from a technology solutioning standpoint. And I think in some ways, India has shown the way in that respect, because we have now been able to find solutions where we are able to combine wind and solar and some amount of storage to provide solutions that are almost quasi-firm solutions. And these are also 30, 40% cheaper than coal-based power. And I think that's actually quite a remarkable evolution that we've done. And I don't see any other country in any other part of the world that has actually gone down this path as India is doing right now. And really part of the reason that we're doing it is because the utilities are not that sophisticated, as I'm sure they're also not so sophisticated in Africa. And they are saying, don't give us all these separate pieces of power, which all has different generation profiles and so on, and ask us to then balance, this complex grid. Why don't you just give us more base load kind of power? And so now, in the most recent auction that has happened in India for renewable energy, for these complex solutions, the kind of profile that we are now providing is in the middle of the day, there are 2 peak hours, in the morning and the evening. We are providing 100% availability of renewable energy in those peak blocks of time. And the balance of the time, we are providing at least 50%, all through the course of the year, using only wind and solar at a price which is still 20-25% cheaper than coal-based power. Now, of course, I know that our colleague from NTPC is sitting here, and he's a thermal generator, but also getting massively into renewables now. So hopefully he will agree with this. But anyway, I will let him make.
No, we will come to him later.
So anyway, the point being that now we're able to sculpt renewable energy solutioning, and at costs which are very, very attractive. And so even from a reliability standpoint, I think renewables is now getting to a point where we can start finding good innovative solutions which actually are able to meet grid requirements in a much better way than they were able to do earlier. The third thing is accessibility. Now, on accessibility, if you look at the India experience, Damilola, several years ago, there were many, many thousands of villages in India that were not electrified. And the grid actually did not reach a lot of villages and did not reach, obviously, many households. I think one of the great things that the Indian government did, actually 2 things that the Indian government did on the grid front, is number one, we created a single grid across the entire country. India now operates the single largest grid, or the largest single grid in the world. And that allows us to provide all of these unique solutions, because we can now generate solar in one part of India, we can generate the wind in another part of India, we can put the battery somewhere else, and provide these virtual solutions to any customer in any other part of India. Because we have a grid that is very flexible and that is very well managed. And therefore, we are actually able to find some of these solutions. So, and really exploit the full opportunity of natural resource in the country and provide it wherever it is required. So I think creating that grid and then getting access to every single, or getting that grid to every single village and then to every single household, actually, in some ways, really increase the level of accessibility to energy for everybody in the country. And so my view would be that the lesson, to learn from that in some ways, from the India experience, is that the grid is very important. Because as we electrify going forward, getting the grid to go everywhere is really, in some ways, one of the most important solutions for decarbonization. And therefore, I think every African country needs to think about how to improve the quality and size and the distribution reach of the grid. And not just that, but all of Africa needs to essentially get the entire grid interconnected across the entire continent. I think that is extremely, extremely important, so that you can then generate power in South Africa and supply it all the way to Egypt or vice versa, or supply it from Nigeria to Nairobi, right across the continent. So you have to have those kinds of capabilities. And that's really where multilaterals like the African Development Bank and so on have to come in and fund these very large grid projects across the whole continent. So I think that's certainly one of the learnings I think that India has demonstrated, which has allowed accessibility to really get to a lot of different households in the country. Now, there were a number of companies that started off with business models which were based around the fact that the grid was not there in every single part of India, right? And those companies are now struggling because their fundamental business model of off-grid, microgrid solutions is now in question, because the grid is actually going everywhere. So there's no real reason now to have these little microgrid type solutions. So now Africa's, the question may be different, the context may be different, so I would not rush to say that the same solution might be exactly applicable, but certainly some elements of that, of getting the grid everywhere, I think is certainly very important. The other thing that India did, which is something also that Africa, I think, struggles from, is the issue of the quality, the credit quality of the off-takers. In India, we have distribution utilities that are mostly owned by state governments of India. And the state governments of India and the way they ran the utilities, the quality of those off-takers is not really very good. And we as companies had direct exposure to these distribution utilities, and the quality of the PPAs was not very good, frankly. And therefore, we used to suffer from delayed payments consistently. We used to suffer high financing costs because nobody really wanted to finance PPAs with utilities and so on. And so this was one of the endemic sort of problems in the Indian system. Now, the same, I think, issue also applies to the African continent, where countries don't necessarily have the highest credit ratings. And so people are going to be unwilling to finance PPAs with either sovereigns or with certain sovereigns or with the off-takers. Now, the way India solved that problem is essentially by creating an entity called the Solar Energy Corporation of India. And while it's called Solar Energy Corporation of India, it essentially became a central a company owned by the central government, which auctions PPAs. And so our PPAs suddenly shifted from being signed with the distribution utilities to being signed with SECI. And SECI, having a much higher credit quality, then allowed us to bring down financing costs, broaden the pool of financing that we had access to. And because of the competitive nature of the auctioning process, most of that lower financing cost benefit got passed on to the distribution utilities in the form of a lower tariff. And SECI, as the intermediary, took a little margin in the middle. So it was actually a win-win all around. It was a win for the lenders because they suddenly got a better PPA. It was obviously a win for us because we were able to get financing and therefore broaden the nature of our business. Utilities benefited from a lower financing cost, and SECI got the little margin that it got. So it was actually a very unique solution, which I think, again, is underappreciated in the annals of, I think, the whole clean energy transition. Now, again, the question is, can Africa create an entity like this, which is, again, backed, let's say, by multilaterals like the ADB or the World Bank or other such entities, which becomes in some ways a central mechanism which improves the credit quality of the offtake contracts for anybody who wants to sell power into any of these utilities. That entity could also potentially cover some FX risk. So I think it's those kinds of solutions that are required in the African context, which India has successfully been able to implement, if we are to really broad base the whole large-scale accessibility of power across the entire continent. And I think those are the kinds of the learnings, at least for me, that make the most sense. The other thing is on the financing front. I know one of the key questions is that financing is hard to get because of the credit quality issues and all the execution problems and so on. But I think solutions like the SECI solution, I think then getting the multilaterals to step in and provide FX and offtake risk protection, providing sovereign risk guarantees, I think those are going to be essential to finding solutions to really enhance the ability to implement these solutions at large scale. The other thing is, I think there's some institutional capacity building that needs to happen within African countries, and I am just speaking from, in some ways, the India experience. It's taken us about 15 to 20 years of learning what works and what doesn't work in renewables to get to this point. And now the whole system works very efficiently. I think a lot of that learning through bodies like the ISA or through direct contacts like with the minister before this morning will be very helpful essentially in shaping those kind of conversations, getting a lot of the learnings from here into Africa. And then, once you have all of that happening, then to my mind, capital is not a constraining factor globally, because the moment there are good quality projects and there are market opportunities, a lot of companies will come in and a lot of capital will follow behind them. So those are some of our learnings, and I know that we're running out of time, so let me stop here and hand it back to you, Samir.
No, Sumant, we will applaud you after you answered a couple of questions.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions for you. The first is what I asked the minister. As an Indian enterprise or an enterprise largely operating out of India, how are the headwinds looking for you? He kind of skirted the question around the IRA and the border adjustment mechanism. Should countries or companies in the global south be thinking about these questions seriously? Are these significant developments, and are they going to shape a future in a way that might leave out certain actors from it?
Yeah, that's a bit of an unfair question, Samir, because we were talking about this last night, and I expressed a lot of views to you, and you're sort of therefore throwing the question back at me. But look, I think that what we are now witnessing is the whole clean energy transition, which, let's say, in the years leading up to 2020, or let's say pre-COVID, was a bit of a niche sector where a lot of people still had doubts about whether the sector really was there, how important it was, and so on. I think now the fact that it's a very large scale global opportunity, which has the ability to reshape economies, to create jobs, that this is going to be one of the next big sort of huge areas of development globally, I think has sparked in some ways a global trade war, where countries are trying to improve their position, either through subsidies or mandates or other incentive mechanisms. And certainly the US has chosen to make this one of the key central planks of their growth and industrial policy going forward. And so events like or programs like the IRA are essentially a way for the US to channelize much more investment into their own country, which is great for them. It's not really so good for other countries because it is going to squeeze out investment from other countries, unfortunately. And therefore, we in the global South will have to work a little bit harder because now, a lot of the capital is going to suddenly start going into the US. For example, opportunities in green hydrogen, where the US is giving such a massive subsidy of almost $3 a kg, when the cost of production is $4 or $5 in other parts of the world. $3 is almost covering 75% of the total cost of green hydrogen, right? So why should everybody or anybody make any green hydrogen anywhere else in the world other than in the US? And use the US as an export base to export everywhere else in the world. So it is going to lead to more investments in the US and therefore consequently lesser investments in the global South or in any other geography for that matter. Now, some other Western countries are in a position to respond to it with their own incentive programs. But a lot of countries don't have the capability to respond. And that is really not good. And countries like India and potentially even Africa have to really watch out for our own interests in those kinds of, in that context.
And so, look, you have nearly earned your applause, but one more question for you, and Damilola is going to pose that.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. So we have a very big conference happening in Nairobi for the 4th to the 6th. What does it take to get companies like yourself to really invest in African countries? What do you need to see from at least the highest level of government first?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. As it turns out, I'm going to be in East Africa already just before that. But so maybe it doesn't take that much to get me there. But on a more serious note, I think that I think some of the things that I talked about, I think the biggest issues for some of us who look at Africa from the outside is, number one, that it's many, many different countries, all with their different political structures, which have to be dealt with, different regulatory regimes and environments. So it's a complex place to get into. And each of the markets is small. So, there is not a lot that, you can, especially when there are opportunities like we have in India, where it's a single market, we understand it well, it's a huge and growing market, one of the biggest opportunities in the world. There has to be something really attractive to sort of put our effort and focus elsewhere. Now, we will do that selectively, of course, in things like green hydrogen, to go into certain geographies where there are certain benefits of production. But if you want to look at electrification for the local market and for companies like us to go in there, as I said, we need to have the whole issue of sovereign risk protected. We need to know that the quality of the off-takers is good. We need to know that execution issues are single window clearance type situations, that we're not going to go there and get stuck in a lot of red tape and political changes and so on. I think those are practical realities. And unless those issues are reasonably well addressed, I think just given the fragmented nature of the market and the grid, I don't think you'll have a lot of interest coming in from outside, unfortunately.
Madam Minister, would you have something to post to Sumant?
Thank you. I think actually my question is exactly what Damilola was asking, but just to say that the challenges are there, but we are at a position where we are moving away from focusing on the problems in Africa, focusing on the vulnerabilities and now shifting to focusing on solutions. And that will come with a deliberate effort to change the environment, to create an enabling environment for investment. So it is the time to surmount the challenges, the red tape, the political realities, as well as what you rightfully raise, the quality of off-takers. So I would want to say, please come to Nairobi. It's going to be the hub of incubating solutions that work for everybody to decarbonize the world. Yeah.
So thank you for that.
You want to come in, sir?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make a comment. Well, I would like to say that we in Nigeria, we are committed to clean energy. And especially that the government of Nigeria, through its own energy transition plan, make it, domicile in the office of the vice president, the second highest office in the land, in order to ensure commitment. So Nigeria offers great opportunity for companies in India to invest in solar and other renewables. I will tell you my own personal experience. I've been using solar for the last 12 years in my house. I just upgraded now to using lithium batteries in my house. And I found it to be good. It served me. I look at, if I was using fuel, I saved more than 3 million naira over that 10 years. So I think Nigeria offers you great opportunity. Please think about that. You are welcome, and we are looking forward to Indian investment in that sector. Thank you.
Please. Ambassador.
Thank
High
you.
Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for giving me the floor. I just want to take this moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Sumant. I hope my pronunciation is so good, for his brilliant remarks. And I wish to inform you that Rwanda has also a lot of opportunities. My country has been ranked number 2. It has been ranked as the second growing economy in Africa. And Rwanda has been ranked as the second easiest place to do business in Africa. So we do have a lot of potentials. So I would like to invite you also to visit Rwanda and see what my country can offer. We do have a very conducive investment environment. And on top of that, there is zero tolerance for corruption in my country. Thank you very much.
But I must tell you that as a think tank, we are already committed at ORF to all the countries that have spoken. Nigeria, we are having a conversation with. Rwanda, we have a Kigali dialogue in, which is one of our biggest dialogues that we do annually. World Bank has partnered with us, Junaid. And of course, Kenya is the home to many of our conversations on climate and environment for many, many years. Does anyone else want to come in on this particular aspect? And you want to come in? Please.
Thank you very much. I just, happened to be in this meeting coincidentally. I don't know that such meeting is taking place. My name is Engineer Abubakar Ali. I'm the Director, Renewable and Rural Power Access Department in the Federal Ministry of Power, Nigeria. We've been here for the past 4 days. I am a member of the Technical Committee for the Energy Transition Working Group, which we've been working for the past 3 days from morning till the following day to have a communique that which now is going under resolution to be passed. Just like the ambassador said, Damilola, my sister, she has been in Nigeria as the MD of Rural, Pioneer MD of Rural Education Agency, which we worked with her. And it happens my department is the department overseeing the Rural Education Agency in Nigeria. And as rightly the ambassador said, Nigeria actually is well, positioned for, using solar to develop or to provide electricity for our people. We have a lot of deficit. Nigeria has a population of over 200 million. About 40% have only access to electricity. And we have the mini-grid regulation, which we have a license which from 1 megawatt is to have a license to, operate solar solutions. But now we are upgrading that license to 5 megawatts so that we can attract meaningful investment, and also with the ease of doing business that government now put in place, actually to give comfort for investors to come and invest, and also for them to repatriate, the profit that they got on their investment. And the department is solely, saddled with the responsibility and working with the Ruralification Agency for us to achieve that. So I believe you are welcome to Nigeria. And we are here in the land as ministry. We are ready to, cooperate with you and make it possible for investors to come and invest so that our teeming population will get the renewable, energy sources, energy supply to, better the life of common people in the country. So thank you very much. We are happy to see you. And also the department is the SEforALL in the Ministry of Power. And one very important thing that we did, under the SEforALL portal, we have launched the Central Data Management System, which we have mapped the entire country. And we have mapped more than 3.9, settlements, over 2.8 buildings, and identifying the productive uses in each of these communities. So when you go for the Nigeria,
I'll have to interrupt you,
yes,
because we have to move with the program. But
so please, when you come to Nigeria, we can discuss in detail, and those things are there so that we can move forward.
Yeah, because I want to go back to Damilola now.
Okay, thank you.
Damilola, thank you.
So being a Nigerian, I have to prop up my own country as well. I just wanted to talk about the mini grid regulation that Nigeria does have. It's probably the most sophisticated in Africa because it talks to what happens when the grid comes. And it also means that the equipment there can integrate with the grid, which we didn't find in a lot of mini grid regulations. There's also a 2 gigawatt auction that's going to happen in a few years, which I think we'll be interested in. But, we really see as maybe Kenya, the manufacturing hub for green hydrogen, Nigeria, even solar manufacturing. Rwanda is doing a lot with our carbon market space. So, it might see a bit fragmented now, but it is actually quite integrated. And because this is something people need to survive, you will see there's a difference in how much they require it. It's not maybe if people are using very dirty fuels here, which we're trying to convert. And with my colleague from Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, we're saying, how do we have 10,000 EV bus, which will have large amount of charging, solar, it just can't be reliant on the grid. So I just wanted to say that we are ready, especially as Sustainable Energy for All, to take the best bits of each country's for you and put a portfolio together with all the companies here who are interested in Africa, and support from the World Bank, hopefully. And lastly, I think it's also important to note that the new World Bank president is coming to Nigeria on the 3rd to the 5th because of the potential that he sees on the continent to really, really drive the clean energy transition. So
what I really like about this is that they've been passionate country pitches, Sumant. But let me come to Junaid, although he's going to speak to us later in the day, but I want you to come in at this stage as well, Junaid. And then I'm going to come to you, Sumant, at the end to top it up.
Yeah, just 2 points to reiterate what we're hearing from our colleagues in Africa. Africa's path to full electricity goes through the off-grid into the grid. It is one of the most fascinating journey that has started. And what we're seeing in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Rwanda, several countries are beginning to use the off-grid in a very powerful way. It's forcing the grid to make some decisions. Right. I mean, that's the first path of Africa creating its own path. The second thing, Africa is something very important for South Asia. Africa has power pools, some of the most amazing power pools that exist. South Asia, embarrassingly, has no power pool. And there is a potential in east of South Asia, if you take Bhutan, Nepal, India, my own country, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, this can be one of the world's greatest green power pool that exists. For that, India has to give up its ability to play the middleman and say that we all want to enter into a power pool. If it does that, it'll change 350 million people's lives in the eastern side in a massive way. Africa has a lot of experience in power pool that I think we need to draw upon. But the off-grid is a revolution that's happening in Africa. And I'll come back to this credit enhancement and guarantee story, which I think will play a big role in the coming years.
So before I turn back to Sumant, does someone want to come in on this conversation? You want to ask a question? Okay. To Sumant.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much for you are what we call in Kenya brutally honest, especially in the question of investing in Africa, given the fragmented nature, political and what have you. Let me ask you a question about the mini grids in India, which you sort of did not give a lot of emphasis for the fact that the main grid is almost penetrating everywhere. In Africa, I think mini grid is, as he says, off grid, is coming up and seems to be the pathway. What was the experience of India in terms of cost of power when you are supplying power off grid and the reliability? Is it something which Africa can borrow at this point in time as it transitions to the main grid supply?
Okay, so Samir, I'll answer that and I'll just give wrap-up comments as well. Yeah. So look, I think that off-grid is a very tempting solution because it sort of gets the solution to the people who don't have power faster. But I think it's also distracting because ultimately governments then start focusing on finding off-grid solutions. I would say radically that it's better for governments to use their focus to actually find these longer-term solutions first, because the cost of power is a lot cheaper if you go with the main grid rather than if you go off-grid. Because off-grid, then you need to, how do you manage all of those things? How do you construct the small off-grid, the mini-grid itself? The cost of generation will be a lot higher than if you generate the solar far away or the wind far away at industrial scale levels and then use the grid to deliver it. My view would be, while it's tempting to focus on off-grid and mini-grid solutions, I would say focus your efforts in Africa on actually creating the grid and use the effort of the multilaterals to go down that path. Now, again, I'm not an expert in Africa, so beyond the point, I shouldn't really be giving you too much of an opinion on this issue. But that's my sense just based on what I've seen happening in India. And those solutions, as I said, will be a lot cheaper as well. So focus on that. So look, I think that it's good to hear the comments here from all the various countries that there is a recognition that the clean energy transition is here, and that's the path that every country wants to follow as well. That's really good to see. I think as all of you start getting some of these solutions in place and the regulatory frameworks in place and get the support of the multilaterals in formulating some of these solutions and new structures, I think it'll make it much more attractive for companies like us to come in and explore. And unfortunately, being honest is something that I have a penchant and potentially a feeling of being too candid at different times. But I think that's something that we will look forward to, which is the development of markets and regulatory processes in Africa. And as it happens, look, ultimately we're all entrepreneurs, and capital will go to wherever there are good returns to be had in a risk-adjusted way. That is a basic fundamental premise. As long as those opportunities are created in Africa, you'll find a lot of companies from India and the other parts of Global South and even the Western world rushing in to make investments happen. But and we all know that it won't happen otherwise. You'll have small scale solutions that'll come in, but you won't have the kind of industrial solutioning that you need to create the grid of the future and there's so much growth of power demand to come in Africa. It's sort of even more growth that has to happen in Africa than in India. And so therefore there is all of that should come from the clean energy side.
Okay, one finger intervention from you and one finger from you. But they are short interventions now because, go ahead.
Very important not to pitch off-grid versus grid. the path to creating access to electricity for all requires the two to be done collaboratively. We've made a mistake in the World Bank of starting off pitching one and now switching to the other when it's really the combination. So it's very important. Africa is teaching us how to bring the two together.
And quick intervention from you because we have the main guest coming in as well now. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to follow up to this topic, Husk Power, we operate mini grids in India and in Nigeria. And just to, we were doing quite well. Actually, we were rolling out 16 mini grids per month in India. We had a 60% CAGR over the past 3 years despite COVID. So there are mini grid companies who are doing exceptionally well, not only in India, but in Nigeria, in both settings, both off-grid and grid connected. And I think there's actually an opportunity. We're doing grid connected mini grids in Nigeria, and we think that there's an opportunity to do similar here in India. Thank you.
So great. Thank you for your comments.
Just one last thing. Look, I agree that off-grids is not it's not an either or. The question is what gets you to the bigger macro solution faster at lower cost. Fair enough, but I'm just saying that you have to have a bigger, anyway.
Okay, so Junaid, we will hear from you on this. I think this is an important question. And I get your point. Small is beautiful as well, and we have to think about it.
We need to understand that this is not a technical issue. It's a political economy issue. If the grid's politics could be such that we can expand the grid, go for it. But
Thank
the
you.
politics of grid
Now
does
please
not
join
allow
me
it.
in applauding Sumant for his intervention.